My name is Elara Voss. I am 29 years old. And the reason I did not marry Graham Ashford on the first Saturday in September, and the reason the $7,000 wedding dress is hanging in a garment bag in my mother's closet instead of in a photograph, and the reason 230 guests received a text message at 6 in the morning that said the wedding has been called off, not postponed, called off, is 14 words on page 14 of a 14-page prenuptial agreement. 14 words. I will tell you the 14 words. But first I need to tell you what the first 13 pages said, because the first 13 pages were reasonable, and the reasonableness of the first 13 pages is the reason the 14th page almost worked. The first 13 pages were the hallway. Clean, well-lit, sensible. The kind of hallway that makes you walk all the way to the end without checking what is behind the last door. Because the hallway was so reasonable, so standard, so much what you would expect from a family with money protecting its assets, that by the time you reached the last door, you had already decided the hallway was safe and you did not need to read the last page carefully. I read the last page carefully. And the 14 words on the last page ended a relationship I had spent 3 years building, a wedding I had spent 9 months planning, and a version of myself that had been willing to believe that the man standing across from her loved the woman she was rather than the body she was in. Before I tell you the 14 words, I need to tell you about the body. My body. Because the 14 words do not make sense without the body, and the body does not make sense without the 29 years that preceded the prenup. I have lived in this body for 29 years. I know it the way you know a house you have lived in since childhood, every corner, every creak, every place where the foundation settles when the temperature changes. I know what it does when I am tired. I know what it does when I am stressed. I know what it does when I am happy and when I am sad and when I am hungry and when I have eaten too much and when I am in the middle of a 12-hour shift at the rehabilitation clinic and my feet are aching and my back is tight and my hands are sore from the specific repetitive labor of helping other people's bodies remember how to move. I am a physical therapist. I have been a physical therapist for 6 years. I work at a rehabilitation clinic in South Charlotte, North Carolina, where I spend my days with people whose bodies have been broken by accidents and surgeries and strokes, and the specific mechanical failures that happen when the architecture of a human body encounters a force it was not designed to withstand. I help them rebuild. I help them stand when standing is the hardest thing they have ever done. I help them walk when walking requires more courage than anything they accomplished before the injury. I know bodies. I know what they can do and what they cannot do, and what they are willing to do and what they refuse to do. I know that bodies are not machines. They are not projects. They are not objects that maintain a fixed weight and a fixed shape across a lifetime. They change. They expand. They contract. They respond to medication and stress and pregnancy and aging and grief and joy and the specific hormonal fluctuations that happen to women across their reproductive lives in ways that no prenuptial agreement can anticipate or control. I know this because I have spent 6 years watching bodies do things their owners did not expect. I have watched a 70-year-old woman who weighed 190 pounds learn to walk again after a hip replacement with more grace and determination than any athlete I have ever trained. I have watched a 25-year-old man who gained 60 pounds during a depressive episode after a spinal cord injury lose the weight, gain it back, lose it again, and eventually arrive at a body that was different from the one he had started with and that was, in its own way, stronger. Bodies are not fixed. Bodies are not conditions. Bodies are not clauses in a legal document. I want you to hold that in your mind as I tell you what was on page 14. Let me tell you about my own body's history, because the history is relevant and the relevance is the part that makes clause 3 not just offensive but personal in a way that Graham's father's attorney could not have known and that Graham should have known. I was a chubby child. I do not use that word with shame. I use it with the specific accuracy of a woman who has spent a long time making peace with the word, and who is no longer willing to use a euphemism. I was chubby. From the time I was 8 until I was 15, I was the girl in the class who was softer and rounder than the other girls and who heard, with the specific frequency that chubby girls hear it, the comments that adults believe are helpful and that are not helpful. My mother's friend at a barbecue. She has such a pretty face. She would be stunning if she just trimmed down a little. My pediatrician. Let us talk about Elara's growth percentiles. She is tracking high. My grandmother, at Thanksgiving, when I reached for a second roll. Elara, honey. Are you sure you need that? Are you sure you need that? 7 words. 7 words that landed in my body at 12 years old and lived there for the next 17 years. 7 words that I heard every time I ate in public. Every time I looked in a mirror. Every time I put on a swimsuit. Every time a man looked at me and I calculated, instantly and without conscious thought, whether the look was attraction or assessment. I lost the weight at 15. Not through health. Through restriction. Through the specific dangerous math that teenage girls learn from the internet and from each other, and from a culture that has decided that a woman's body is a project that requires constant management. I restricted my eating for 2 years. I dropped 32 pounds. I became thin. I became the version of myself that the world rewarded. The world rewarded thinness with attention. With compliments. With the specific warm approval of adults who said you look amazing. Elara, without understanding that the looking amazing was costing me meals and sleep and the ability to sit at a dinner table without counting. I recovered in college. I found a therapist who helped me understand that the relationship between my body and my worth was not a fixed equation, and that the equation had been written by people who did not have the right to write it. I gained back some of the weight. I arrived at a body that weighed approximately 132 pounds, and that I had spent 10 years learning to be at peace with. 132 pounds. That is the number that appears on Clause 3 of the prenuptial agreement. That is the number that Graham's father's attorney used as the baseline against which my body would be measured for the duration of my marriage. 132 pounds plus 20 pounds equals 152 pounds. If I ever weighed more than 152 pounds, for any reason, at any point, for any duration, I would forfeit all claims to shared marital property, spousal support, and equitable distribution. 152 pounds. A healthy pregnancy weight gain of 25 to 35 pounds would put me at 157 to 167 pounds. Clause 3 would trigger. During pregnancy. With Graham's child. I want you to sit with that. A prenuptial agreement written by a man's father's attorney that would financially penalize a woman for carrying that man's baby. That is what was on page 14. Let me tell you about Graham now, because Graham is not a villain in the way that villains are usually presented in these stories. Graham is not cruel. Graham is not cold. Graham is not calculating. Graham is something that is, in some ways, worse than all of those things. Graham is incurious. Graham Ashford is 31 years old. He is a financial analyst at a private equity firm in Charlotte. He is tall and lean, and he has the specific effortless attractiveness of a man who has never had to think about his body because his body has never been a subject of conversation. Nobody has ever asked Graham if he is sure he needs that second role. Nobody has ever told Graham he has such a nice face and would be stunning if he just trimmed down. Nobody has ever written a clause in a legal document about Graham's body, because Graham's body has always been treated as a neutral container for the person inside it rather than a condition of his value. Graham grew up in a house in Myers Park, one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Charlotte. His father, Edward Ashford, is a managing partner at an investment firm. His mother, Caroline, is a woman I will need to tell you about separately, because Caroline is the part of this story that changed everything. Graham and I met at a friend's birthday party in 2021. He was 28. I was 26. He was standing by the bar and he was tall and his laugh was warm and he talked to me for 45 minutes about a podcast he liked about architecture and I thought, this man is genuinely interested in things. This man has curiosity. I was wrong about the curiosity. Graham had interests. Interests are not the same as curiosity. Interests are the things you choose to pay attention to. Curiosity is the willingness to pay attention to things you did not choose, the uncomfortable things, the complex things, the things that require you to look at a prenuptial agreement your father's attorney drafted and read every page, including page 14, before handing it to the woman you are about to marry. Graham had not read page 14. Or, and this is the possibility I find more disturbing, Graham had read page 14 and had decided it was not important enough to mention. Either way, the curiosity was not there. We dated for 2 years before the engagement. The 2 years were, by most measures, good years. Graham was attentive. He was present. He planned dates. He remembered the things I told him and referenced them later in ways that made me feel seen. He met my mother and was charming. He met my sister and was kind. He met my colleagues at the clinic and asked them intelligent questions about physical therapy that suggested he had done research beforehand, which he had, because Graham was the kind of man who prepared for social encounters the way he prepared for meetings, thoroughly, strategically, with the goal of making a good impression. I did not understand, at the time, that making a good impression and being a good person are different skills. Making a good impression is a performance. Being a good person is a practice. Graham was excellent at the performance. The practice was where the gap lived. The gap showed itself in small ways that I noticed and catalogued and explained away in the manner of women who are in love and who want the love to be correct. He commented on what I ate. Not often. Not cruelly. In the way of a man who believed he was being health conscious. He said things like, "Are you sure you want the pasta? I thought you were doing the low-carb thing." He said things like, "You look great when you have been working out consistently," which sounds like a compliment until you hear the word consistently and understand that it means, you look less great when you have not been working out. He gave me a Peloton for Christmas in our 2nd year of dating. I had not asked for a Peloton. I had asked for a weekend trip to Asheville. He said, "I thought this would be great for you. You have been saying you want to be more consistent with your workouts." I had not said that. He had said that. He had said it 3 weeks earlier, on a Sunday morning, after we had been out to dinner the night before, a dinner at which I had eaten dessert, a dinner after which he had put his hand on my hip in bed and said, in a voice that was gentle and private and that I have replayed in my mind many times since, "You know, babe, the holidays are coming. Maybe we should both tighten things up a little so we look good for New Year's." Tighten things up. So we look good. He had said we. He had meant me. The Peloton was a correction disguised as a gift. It was the gym membership from the journal story. It was the specific kind of present a man gives a woman when he wants her body to change, and when he does not want to say that out loud because saying it out loud would make him the kind of man he does not want to be. I had thanked him for the Peloton. I had ridden it 3 times a week for 4 months. I had lost 7 pounds. He had noticed. He had said, "Babe, you look incredible." The incredible had been conditional. I had not understood that the incredible was conditional until I read page 14. The prenuptial agreement was presented to me 11 days before the wedding. Graham's family attorney, a man named Whitfield, had drafted it. Graham's father, Edward Ashford, had requested it. Graham had told me about it on a Tuesday evening in the kitchen of the apartment we shared while I was slicing tomatoes for salad and while he was standing in the doorway with an envelope in his hand and the specific apologetic expression of a man who is about to ask his fiancée to sign a legal document and who knows it is not going to go well. He said, Elara, my father has asked us to sign a prenup. I set the knife down. I said, when did this come up? He said, he mentioned it last month. I have been trying to find the right time to bring it up. I said, the right time was last month, Graham. The wedding is in 11 days. He said, I know. I am sorry. I should have told you sooner. But the document is straightforward. It is mostly about protecting family assets. My father has significant holdings and he wants to make sure that the Ashford trust remains within the family in the event of a dissolution. I said, in the event of a dissolution. You mean if we get divorced? He said, it is standard language. Every family with assets does this. It is not about us. It is about the structure. I said, Graham, I am not offended by the idea of a prenup. I understand that your family has money. I understand that your father wants to protect the trust. I am a reasonable person. Give me the document. I will read it. He handed me the envelope. I took it. I did not read it that night. I was tired. I had been planning a wedding for 9 months while working full-time. I was exhausted. I read the prenup the next day. Wednesday. In my office during my lunch break. The first 13 pages were, as Graham had said, straightforward. Page 1 through 3, definitions. What constituted marital property? What constituted separate property? What constituted Ashford family trust assets? Standard. Page 4 through 7, division of property in the event of divorce. I would retain my own assets. Graham would retain his. Shared property acquired during the marriage would be divided equitably. Standard. Page 8 through 10, spousal support provisions. Structured alimony based on length of marriage and income differential. Reasonable. Page 11 through 13, provisions regarding the Ashford family trust. The trust assets would remain with Graham in the event of divorce. I would have no claim to the trust. The trust was worth approximately $12 million. I understood why Edward wanted it protected. I read 13 pages. I thought, this is reasonable. I will sign it. I almost did not read page 14. Page 14 was labeled Addendum A, Additional Provisions. It had 3 clauses. Clause 3 was the 14 words. In the event that either party's body weight exceeds their documented weight at the time of marriage by more than 20 pounds, said party shall forfeit all claims to shared marital property, spousal support, and equitable distribution. I read it 3 times. Either party. Body weight. Exceeds. 20 pounds. Forfeit all claims. I sat in my office at the rehabilitation clinic where I work with people whose bodies have been broken and who are rebuilding them, and I read a clause that said if I gained more than 20 pounds during my marriage, I would lose everything. Not if I cheated. Not if I committed fraud. Not if I abused a substance. If I gained weight. 20 pounds. The clause was written as either party, as if it applied to both of us. But the clause was not for both of us. Graham weighed 214 pounds. 20 pounds on a 214-pound man is negligible. 20 pounds on a 132-pound woman is the difference between my current body and a body that has been pregnant. A body that has been on certain medications. A body that has aged. A body that has lived. The clause would trigger if I gained more than 20 pounds. A healthy pregnancy involves a weight gain of 25 to 35 pounds. If I got pregnant with Graham's child and gained the normal, healthy, medically appropriate amount of weight that a pregnant woman gains, I would, under the terms of this prenuptial agreement, forfeit all claims to shared property, spousal support, and equitable distribution. Graham's father's attorney had written a clause that would punish me financially for having a baby. I sat in my office for 37 minutes after reading Clause 3. I did not call Graham. I did not call my mother. I called my friend Diener. Diener Mochetti is a family law attorney in Charlotte. She is the kind of attorney who uses the word unconscionable the way other people use the word ridiculous, frequently, precisely, and with the full weight of its legal meaning. I sent her the prenup by email. The full 14 pages. I highlighted Clause 3 in yellow. She called me 40 minutes later. She said, "Elara, I have read the document. Pages 1 through 13 are standard and enforceable. Page 14, Clause 3, is unconscionable. It is potentially unenforceable under North Carolina law, which requires that prenuptial agreements be fair and reasonable at the time of execution and not promote divorce. A clause that penalizes a spouse for weight gain, which is a natural biological process, particularly in the context of pregnancy, aging, illness, medication side effects, and the normal fluctuations of a human body over the course of a lifetime, would likely be struck down by a court if challenged." She said, "But I need you to understand something." I said, "Tell me." She said, "The clause being unenforceable does not make it harmless. The clause is a message. The message is, your body is a condition of this marriage. The message is, if your body changes, your financial security changes. The message is, the value of this marriage to you is contingent on remaining within 20 pounds of the body you have right now." She said, "Elara, that is not a prenuptial clause. That is a leash." I sat with that word. Leash. She said, "I need to ask you something. Did Graham draft this clause? Or did his father's attorney draft it?" I said, "Graham said his father's attorney drafted the entire document." She said, "Did Graham read it before he gave it to you?" I said, "He said it was straightforward. He said it was about protecting family assets." She said, "Elara, did Graham read page 14? I did not know. I did not know if my fiancé had read the prenup he had handed me. I did not know if the man I was about to marry knew that page 14 of the document he had given me contained a clause that would penalize me financially for gaining weight. That uncertainty is the part one wants you to sit with. Because there are only two possibilities. Either Graham read the prenup and knew about Clause 3 and gave it to me anyway. Or Graham did not read the prenup and gave me a document he had not reviewed, a document containing a clause about my body weight, because his father told him to and he did not think it was necessary to check what his father's attorney had written about his future wife's body. Both possibilities are unacceptable. One is cruelty. The other is negligence so profound that it is indistinguishable from cruelty. I went home that evening. Graham was in the kitchen. He was making pasta. He was playing music from a speaker on the counter. He was the version of himself that I had fallen in love with, relaxed, warm, domestic, the specific version of Graham that existed in the kitchen on weekday evenings when the world outside was somewhere else and the world inside was just the two of us. I set the prenup on the counter. I opened it to page 14. I pointed to Clause 3. I said, "Graham, read this." He looked at it. He read it. I watched his face. His face did something I had been watching for very carefully. I was watching for recognition, the specific micro-expression of a man who already knows what he is reading and who is calculating how to respond. Or for surprise, the genuine confusion of a man who is seeing something for the first time. What I saw was neither. What I saw was discomfort. The specific shallow discomfort of a man who had scanned the document quickly and had not lingered on Clause 3 because Clause 3 was about bodies and Graham did not think about bodies the way I thought about bodies, and the clause had not registered as significant to a man who had never been told at 12 years old that he did not need the second role. He said, "Elara. I am sure that is standard language." I said, "It is not standard language. There is nothing standard about a clause that says I lose everything if I gain £20. He said, "It says either party. It applies to both of us." I said, "Graham, you weigh £214. £20 on you is nothing. £20 on me is pregnancy. Do you understand that? If I get pregnant and gain the weight that every doctor in the country would tell me is healthy, I forfeit my rights under this agreement." He looked at the document again. He said, "I am sure my father did not intend it that way." I said, "Graham, what way did your father intend it?" He said, "He probably just wanted, I do not know, a general health and wellness clause. A lot of these agreements have them." I said, "A lot of these agreements do not have a £20 weight clause that would trigger during pregnancy. I know this because I called a family law attorney today, and she told me this clause is unconscionable." He said, "Elara, you are overreacting." I stopped. Overreacting. The word landed in the kitchen like a glass falling off a counter. I said, "Graham, I am a physical therapist. I have spent 6 years of my professional life working with human bodies. I understand bodies better than your father's attorney, better than your father, and, clearly, better than you. I am not overreacting. I am reading a legal document that says my financial security in this marriage is contingent on my body weight. That is not an overreaction. That is a reading." He said, "Elara, I will talk to my father. I will ask Whitfield to remove the clause." I said, "Graham, I do not want the clause removed. I want to understand why it was there." He said, "Because my father is protective." I said, "Protective of what?" He said, "Of the family. Of the assets. Of." He stopped. He knew what he was about to say. He was about to say, "Of the image." Because that is what Clause 3 was about. Not health. Not wellness. Not the vague, sanitized language of a man who is concerned about his future daughter-in-law's well-being. Clause 3 was about the Ashford image. The Ashford family was a family that looked a certain way. The wives looked a certain way. The women at the country club dinners and the charity galas and the Christmas card photographs looked a certain way. And the looking a certain way was not optional. The looking a certain way was, in the Ashford family's understanding, a condition of membership. I had been auditioning for membership for 3 years. The peloton was part of the audition. The "you look incredible when you are consistent" was part of the audition. The "tighten things up before New Year's" was part of the audition. And Clause 3 was the contract. The audition had been informal. Clause 3 made it official. I need to tell you about Caroline before I tell you what I did next, because Caroline is the part of this story that turned my decision from a personal one into a structural one. Caroline Ashford is Graham's mother. She is 59 years old. She is a thin woman. She has been a thin woman for as long as I have known her. She wears a size 2. She eats salads at dinner. She drinks white wine but never more than 1 glass. She exercises every morning at 6. A private trainer comes to the house in Myers Park, and she has the specific maintained thinness of a woman whose body is a full-time job. I had always assumed Caroline was thin because Caroline wanted to be thin. Because Caroline enjoyed fitness. Because Caroline had the metabolism and the discipline and the preference for salads that some women have naturally. On Thursday, 2 days after I read page 14, I drove to Myers Park. I drove to see Caroline. Not Edward. Not Graham. Caroline. Because I had a question. I arrived at the house at 10 in the morning. Edward was at work. Graham was at his office. Caroline was in the sunroom, doing something on her laptop. She was wearing workout clothes. Her trainer had just left. She was surprised to see me. She said, "Elara, is everything all right?" I said, "Caroline, I need to ask you something. And I need you to be honest with me." She set the laptop aside. She said, "Of course." I said, "Caroline, did Edward make you sign a prenup when you married him?" She looked at me for a long moment. She said, "Yes." I said, "Did the prenup have a clause about weight?" The room changed. Not the physical room. The room between us. The specific interpersonal space that exists between a mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law, which is usually managed with warmth and distance and the careful choreography of two women who are sharing a man, shifted. The distance closed. The warmth became something else, something rawer and more honest. She said, "How did you find out?" I said, "Graham gave me the prenup 3 days ago." Page 14. Clause 3. £20. Caroline looked at the window. She was quiet for a long time. She said, "Elara, sit down." I sat down. She said, "I signed the same clause 33 years ago. I was 26. Edward's father's attorney drafted it. Edward gave it to me 2 weeks before the wedding. I did not read it carefully. I signed it. I did not understand what I had signed until I got pregnant with Graham and gained 31 pounds, and Edward's father called Edward and told him that the clause had been triggered and that I needed to lose the weight within 6 months of the birth or the terms would apply." She said, "I lost the weight in 4 months." She said, "I have not gained more than 3 pounds in either direction in 33 years. She said, "I work out every morning at 6 because I have been working out every morning at 6 for 33 years because the prenuptial agreement I signed at 26 told me that my financial security in my marriage was contingent on my body weight, and I have been living inside that clause for 3 decades. She said, "Elara, the clause was not written by Whitfield. It was written by Edward's father's attorney in 1991. It has been in every Ashford prenup since then. Edward's brother's wife signed the same clause. Edward's sister's husband signed the same clause, although the weight threshold was higher for men, 40 pounds, because the clause was not about health. It was about appearance. It was about the Ashford family looking a certain way at the country club and the charity gala and the Christmas card photograph." She said, "I have been a size 2 for 33 years because a piece of paper told me I had to be." She looked at me. She said, "Elara, do not sign it." I looked at Caroline Ashford. I looked at a woman who had been thin for 33 years. Who worked out every morning at 6. Who ate salads at dinner. Who drank 1 glass of wine. Who had maintained a body that was not the body she would have chosen for herself, but the body that a prenuptial agreement had required of her. 33 years. In a leash. And she was telling me not to put it on. I said, "Caroline, why didn't you tell Graham?" She said, because I was ashamed. Because admitting what the clause has done to me would require admitting what I have allowed it to do. Because the leash only works if you pretend it is a necklace. The leash only works if you pretend it is a necklace. That sentence entered my body and has not left. I said, Caroline, I'm going to cancel the wedding. She said, I know. I said, Graham is going to be devastated. She said, Graham is going to be fine. Graham is his father's son. He will be uncomfortable for a while and then he will find another woman and his father will draft another prenup and the clause will be on page 14 again. Unless someone breaks the pattern. I said, I am going to break the pattern. She said, good. She said, Elara, I wish I had been you at 29. I wish I had read page 14. I wish I had said no. I held her hand. I said, Caroline, it is not too late. She looked at me with the specific expression of a woman who has been told it is not too late and who is deciding, for the first time in 33 years, whether to believe it. She said, maybe. She said it quietly. But she said it. I called off the wedding on Friday morning. 8 days before the ceremony. I had spent Thursday night in a hotel room. I had not gone home to the apartment I shared with Graham. I had texted him at 9. I am staying with a friend tonight. I need space. He had texted back, Elara, please. Can we talk about this? I had not responded. On Friday morning, I called him. I said, Graham, the wedding is off. He said, Elara, because of the clause? I told you I would have Whitfield remove it. I said, Graham, the clause is not the problem. The clause is the symptom. The problem is that your family has been putting this clause in prenuptial agreements for 33 years. The problem is that your mother has been a size 2 for 3 decades because a piece of paper told her she had to be. The problem is that your father's definition of a marriage includes a weight limit. And the problem is that you handed me a document containing that clause without reading it, or that you read it and did not think it was worth mentioning. He said, I did not read it carefully. I trusted my father's attorney. I said, you trusted your father's attorney more than you respected me. You gave me a legal document that contained a clause about my body weight 11 days before our wedding, and you did not check what was in it. That is not a paperwork error, Graham. That is a statement about what you consider important. Your father's attorney's work was important enough to deliver without question. My body, my dignity, my right to gain weight during pregnancy without financial penalty, those things were not important enough to check for. He was quiet. I said, Graham, I need to tell you something else. He said, what? I said, I spoke to your mother. She told me about her clause. She told me she signed the same one 33 years ago. She told me she has been living inside it since she was 26. She told me the clause was your grandfather's invention. She told me every Ashford spouse has signed one. He said, my mother told you that? I said, yes. He was quiet for a long time. He said, Elara, I did not know about my mother. I said, I believe you did not know, Graham. And the not knowing is part of the problem. You grew up in a house where your mother worked out every morning at 6 and 8 salads every night, and you never asked why. You grew up watching your mother maintain a body that was not her natural body, and you did not wonder about it because you did not think about it because in the Ashford family, women's bodies are managed and men's attention is elsewhere. I said, I am not going to live in that family. I am not going to eat salads for 33 years because a piece of paper told me to. I am not going to work out at 6 every morning because the alternative is forfeiting my share of a marriage I contributed to equally. I am not going to pretend a leash is a necklace. He said, Elara, I love you. I said, I know you do. And I believe you. But love without curiosity is not enough. Love without the willingness to read page 14 of a document you are asking me to sign is not enough. Love that does not notice that your mother has been imprisoned by a clause for 33 years is not enough. I said, the wedding is off. I will handle the guests. You handle your family. I hung up. The text went out at 6 in the morning on Saturday. The wedding has been called off. This is not a postponement. Elara and Graham have made a mutual decision not to proceed. Thank you for your love and support. It was not a mutual decision. But the text was for 230 people who did not need the full story. The full story was for me and Graham and Caroline and Dina and my mother and the specific small circle of people whose understanding I needed. My mother drove from Greensboro to Charlotte that afternoon. She sat on the couch in the hotel room where I had been staying since Thursday. She did not ask me to explain. She sat beside me and she held my hand and she waited for me to be ready to talk. When I was ready, I told her. I told her about the prenup. About page 14. About clause 3. About the £20. About Caroline. About 33 years. About the leash and the necklace. My mother listened. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Elara, do you remember when you were 12 and your grandmother told you that you did not need the second roll? I said, yes. She said, I did not say anything at the time. I should have. I should have told your grandmother that my daughter could eat as many rolls as she wanted and that her body was not a subject for the dinner table. I did not say it because I was afraid of making a scene. I was afraid of being the difficult daughter-in-law. She said, I have carried the not saying for 17 years. I have watched you struggle with your body and I have known, every time, that the struggle began at that dinner table with that roll and that I could have stopped it and I did not. She said, Elara, you just stopped it. Not for yourself at 12. For yourself at 29. You read the clause that your grandmother's comment was the first draft of, and you said no. She said, I am prouder of you right now than I have ever been. I put my head on my mother's shoulder. I cried. Not the grief crying. Not the anger crying. The relief crying. The specific crying that happens when you have been carrying a weight, not 20 pounds, not a body, but the weight of a lifetime of being told that your value is in your size, and you have finally, at 29, set it down. The aftermath was its own education. Edward Ashford called me twice. I did not answer. He left one voicemail. The voicemail said, Elara, I am disappointed. The prenup was a standard family document. The clause has been in our agreements for 3 decades. Every Ashford spouse has signed it. I do not understand why this has become an issue. Every Ashford spouse has signed it. He said it the way people say things when they believe that precedent is the same as justification. As if the clause being 33 years old made it 33 years right. I did not return his call. Graham texted me intermittently for 3 weeks after the cancellation. The texts followed a pattern. The first week was apologetic. Elara, I am sorry. I should have read the document. I should have caught the clause. Please let me fix this. The second week was explanatory. Elara, The clause was my grandfather's. My father kept it out of habit. It was never enforced. My mother was never actually at risk. It was symbolic. The third week was frustrated. Elara. You are throwing away a 3-year relationship over a clause that would have been removed. I told you I would have it removed. You did not give me the chance. I did not respond to any of the texts. Not because I was punishing Graham. Because the texts told me everything I needed to know about where Graham was in his understanding of what had happened. He thought the problem was the clause. He thought removing the clause would fix the problem. He did not understand that the clause was not the problem. The clause was the output. The problem was the system that produced the clause, the family that had been managing women's bodies through legal documents for 3 decades. The father who considered a weight limit a standard provision. The mother who had lived inside the provision for 33 years without telling her son. The attorney who had typed the words without questioning them. The culture inside the Ashford family that treated a woman's body as a depreciating asset that needed to be contractual maintained. The clause could be removed. The system could not. Not by removing a clause. Only by leaving the system. I left the system. Caroline called me in November. 2 months after the cancelled wedding. She said, Elara, I want to tell you something. I said, tell me. She said, I have hired an attorney. A woman named Helen Treadwell. She is a family law attorney who specializes in prenuptial challenges. I have asked her to review my prenuptial agreement. I said, Caroline. She said, the clause has been in effect for 33 years. Helen tells me it is unconscionable and that it would not survive a legal challenge. She tells me that the entire prenuptial agreement may be voidable based on the inclusion of the clause, because a fundamentally unconscionable provision contained the enforceability of the entire document. She said, Elara, I am not sure I am going to leave Edward. I have been married to him for 33 years and the marriage is more complicated than a single clause. She said, but I am going to have the clause removed. Legally. By a court. Not by Whitfield. Not by Edward. By a judge who will read the clause and who will say what Helen has already said, which is that a prenuptial provision that financially penalizes a woman for the natural changes in her body across a 33-year marriage is not a contract. It is a cage. She said, you broke the pattern, Elara. You said no. And the saying of the no made me understand that I had been saying yes for 33 years and that the yes had cost me something I cannot calculate. I held the phone. I said, Caroline. I am glad. She said, I wanted you to know. Because you are the reason. Not Graham. Not Edward. Not the attorney. You. She said, a 29-year-old woman who read page 14. It has been 5 months since the cancelled wedding. I am living in a 1-bedroom apartment in South Charlotte. I wake up at 7, not 6, because I work out when I want to, not when a clause tells me to. I eat what I want to eat. I weigh what I weigh. The number on the scale is not a condition of anything, not my security, not my value, not my access to the financial protections of a partnership I have contributed to equally. I want to tell you what the first month was like, because the first month is the part that nobody talks about when they talk about women who walk away from things. People talk about the walking. They do not talk about the standing still that comes after. The first month was grief. Not for Graham. For the 3 years. For the version of the story I had been telling myself about who we were together. For the wedding dress in the garment bag. For the seating chart I had rearranged 14 times. For the vows I had written in a notebook that is now in a drawer I do not open. For the specific future I had been building, the house, the children, the Thanksgivings, the growing old, that had been dismantled by 14 words on a page I almost did not read. The first month was also rage. Not at Graham. At myself. For the peloton I had ridden without questioning why it had been given. For the "you look incredible when you are consistent" that I had received as a compliment instead of recognizing as a condition. For the tighten things up that I had absorbed into my body without asking whose voice it actually belonged to. For the 12-year-old at the Thanksgiving table who had heard "Are you sure you need that?" and who had spent the next 17 years answering the question in every mirror and every meal and every relationship. The rage was not comfortable. The rage was not the clean, cinematic anger of a woman who knows she is right. The rage was messy and hot, and it arrived at 3 a.m, and it kept me awake, and it made me cry, and it made me run 5 miles at 6 a.m, not because a clause told me to, but because the rage needed somewhere to go and the pavement was the only place that was open. By the second month, the rage had settled into something else. Something quieter. Something more structural. I started a group at the clinic. Not officially. Not funded. Just a conversation. Every Thursday at noon, in the break room, with anyone who wanted to come. I called it Bodies and Worth. 5 women came the first week. 8 came the second. By the 4th week, there were 14 people in the break room, physical therapists, occupational therapists, 2 nurses from the hospital next door, a receptionist, sitting in plastic chairs eating lunch and talking about the specific relationship between a woman's body and a woman's value and the specific ways that relationship had been written into their lives by other people's language. We talked about the role at Thanksgiving. We talked about the peloton that was a correction. We talked about the prenup that was a leash. We talked about the comments from doctors and mothers and husbands and strangers that had landed in our bodies like seeds, and that had grown into the specific persistent weed of believing that our worth was measured in pounds. We talked about the patients we worked with. The woman who apologized for her weight before every session. The man who cried when he could not do a push-up at 300 pounds and who did not understand that the crying was not about the push-up, it was about the 30 years of being told that his body was a failure. The teenage girl who came in for ACL rehabilitation and who was more worried about the weight she would gain during recovery than about whether her knee would work again. We talked about all of it. And the talking was the first time in my life that the conversation about bodies had belonged to the people inside the bodies rather than the people outside them. The group is still running. It has grown. There are 22 regular attendees now. We meet every Thursday. We are not a therapy group. We are not a support group. We are a room. A room where the word body is not followed by the word but. Where the sentence my body is not followed by a qualification. Where the women in the room are allowed to exist in their bodies without a clause that tells them what the bodies are allowed to weigh. That room did not exist before page 14. Page 14 created it. Not because page 14 was good. Because page 14 made visible the thing that had been invisible, the specific, quiet, contractual way that women's bodies are managed by systems they did not write and do not control. The visibility was the gift. The room was the response. Diener tells me that Caroline's case is progressing. The court hearing is scheduled for next month. Caroline's attorney has filed a motion to void the prenuptial agreement in its entirety on the grounds that the weight clause renders the entire document unconscionable. Edward's attorney has countered that the clause is severable, meaning it can be removed without voiding the rest of the agreement. The court will decide. Caroline and I have spoken 3 times since the cancelled wedding. We are not friends. We are something else, something that does not have a word. We are 2 women who have been on opposite ends of the same clause, separated by 33 years, connected by the specific understanding that the clause was never about weight. It was about control. It was about a family that believed it could write a woman's body into a contract and that the woman would comply because the contract came with a $12 million trust and a house in Myers Park and the specific comfortable life that compliance purchases. Caroline complied for 33 years. I did not comply for 11 days. The difference is not bravery. The difference is timing. Caroline was 26 in 1991. I was 29 in 2024. Caroline did not have the language. I had the language. Caroline did not have a diener. I had a diener. Caroline did not have a room full of women talking about bodies and worth on Thursday afternoons. I had that room, because I built it. After page 14. The difference is not that I am stronger than Caroline. The difference is that Caroline's no at 59 was made possible by my no at 29. And my no at 29 was made possible by her telling me not to sign. We saved each other. Not dramatically. Not in a courtroom. Not with a speech. In a sunbeam. On a Thursday morning. With 5 words. Do not sign it, Elara. I work at the clinic. I help people rebuild their bodies. I hold the hand of a 67-year-old woman named Margaret who is learning to walk again after a knee replacement and who weighs 182 pounds and who is, by every measure I know how to apply, the strongest person I have ever worked with. Margaret does not know about page 14. Margaret does not need to know about page 14. But every time I help Margaret stand up from the parallel bars and she takes a step and her face does the thing faces do when the body surprises the mind by being more capable than the mind believed, every time I see that face, I think about clause 3. I think about a world in which Margaret's body would be a disqualifying condition. I think about a world in which the strength of a 182-pound woman learning to walk again would be worth less than the thinness of a 132-pound woman who has been told that her value is in her weight. That world exists. It exists on page 14 of the Ashford family prenuptial agreement. I do not live in that world anymore. I left it on a Wednesday in a clinic office during my lunch break, holding a highlighted document and a cup of coffee that had gone cold. The coffee was cold because I had been reading. The reading saved my life. Not my physical life. My actual life. The life that begins when you stop accepting that the terms someone else has written for your body are the terms you have to live by. My body is mine. It has always been mine. And no page, not page 14, not any page, gets to say otherwise.